Hi guys, welcome to the Grapplers Academy. This is a follow-on episode on leveling up your wrestling, and today we're going to answer a question that we got asked with regards to wrestling and sort of the positions. So the question kind of asked us: are there any wrestling positions as just like there are on the ground? So you got side control, you got guard, you got mount, all the way through. And they asked, are there sort of any specific positions for wrestling? Now, for this subject, it's quite a large sort of area of discussion, and it's almost probably got stages in it, from like a beginner to intermediate, intermediate to advanced, and advanced up onwards. So we've tried to identify sort of some important positions for beginners and intermediates to focus on, and we're going to sort of go into those positions that we've highlighted. And then we're also going to look at our preferred techniques and why we'd recommend them to, again, almost a beginner intermediate, for starting their wrestling repertoire. But yeah, like, what did you think of this question, Bon?
It's quite a broad topic conversation, isn't it? Wrestling for submission, grappling, and jiu-jitsu is very different from wrestling for MMA.
Hmm.
And kind of the difficulty I've always found with wrestling for BJJ and for grappling is that it's kind of obvious what is about to happen in a match because we're not going to strike. Like, some form of grappling or takedown needs to occur first for the rest of the match to continue. So I should find grappling for sheer wrestling or for submission grappling a lot more difficult to execute than grappling for striking. You can kind of set the wrestling up for striking behind punches and kicks and kind of hide it behind your shots. So yeah, looking at it from the point of view of the person who asked the question, if they're looking at it from strictly a submission, grappling, or jiu-jitsu point of view, then you've got to kind of look at what are the most effective and identifiable positions, because the thing that I think a lot of people get confused with at the beginning of trying to separate wrestling and jiu-jitsu in their mind is it almost seems like two different sports within the same sport to a certain extent. And until you get it into your mind that the techniques and the transitions between the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu need to be essentially one and the same, you've got to think about where is your wrestling technique or takedown going to then take you on the floor. Like, do you want to immediately get to side control? Do you want to get straight away to the back? And this is like kind of a good mindset to get into, or a piece of the puzzle that's going to link it all together for you. You've got to think, which techniques can I select from my wrestling, and where do I want that to take me for my ground game?
Well, definitely. I think there's a lot of misconceptions with people as well, is that when they hear wrestling, all they think about is a takedown, and they kind of almost forget about the intricacies of the control aspect, the intricacies of the footwork, the entries, the strategies behind it as well. Because it's not just the strategies behind it aren't always just to get your partner down to the floor. You may want to kind of pre-fatigue them, get them a little bit on the back step a little bit, almost kind of make them not want to stand up and grapple with you. And it's, for me, it's a bit of a statement maker, the stand-up aspect of the grappling game. Like we looked at the episode on Wednesday with Gary Tonin, that was predominantly a bit of a judo technique, but it was transferred over to a submission grappling arena. So a lot of people as well, they'll look at wrestling and think they can only get techniques from wrestling, whereas there's a whole library out there of different stand-up takedown martial arts where they can get their learning materials from. And then also it's a case of adapting them to the no-gi game or the game that they play. And then also kind of getting rid of the sport-specific stuff. Because there's a few things from like freestyle wrestling where you don't have to worry about when you're doing submission grappling. Like if you're going in for a takedown, you don't have to worry about getting guillotined. Whereas going for a takedown in this, you've got to be aware that there's dangers in going in for it. And yeah, I think it's there's a lot to learn from it and there's a lot to take from it, but it's also trying to learn the way to translate it over to what the purpose for the sport.
Let's get into and talk a bit about positions as opposed to techniques or transitions that are going to lead to a takedown. Like, what are 3 positions that a beginner should start to look to get to or start to control in when they're starting to think about the stand-up aspects of grappling?
See, for this one, like, we highlighted the 3 positions, didn't we? But it took us a bit of time to find it ourselves, didn't we, really? But the positions that we highlighted sort of initially, the main 3 ones were a collar and bicep tie, where you're sort of controlling your opponent's neck, collar or head, as well as their bicep or tricep control, and you're trying to keep that inside control there. The other one was a hip control. Now, this, we sort of translated it to whether you're side onto your opponent with a body lock on the hips, whether you're belly to back, controlling the hips, or whether you're chest to chest and you've got the double underhooks and you're controlling the hips. It's just a general hip control. It's quite a broad area, kind of like guard. Guard's a broad position. And also the last one we looked at was a little bit outside of range, and like that wrist control, controlling your opponent's arms, controlling their wrists, using that to control their shoulders and posture. Like, what do you say is your preferred one out of these controls, Bon?
Yeah, I think before I answer that, like, if we're looking at the positions that you just identified there, and we look at it from a broader perspective in terms of like what is the aim of grappling or wrestling in the stand-up aspect to apply onto your opponent, and you're looking to control different parts of the body that are going to limit or affect their movement, isn't it? And that collar tie, we're controlling the top end of the spine. We've got control on the neck, and as anybody who's done any grappling or wrestling or jiu-jitsu is going to know, you can dictate the movement of your opponent by dictating where the spine is going. So that manipulation over the top of the spine, the head, is massively important. The second one, the biggest, most powerful part of your opponent's body that you need to control is the hips, isn't it? So that's where that body look comes in really important. If you can get control of your opponent's hips, again, you're going to dictate a lot of the movement and start to decide who's going to apply the power. Are you going to be able to get your hips in and apply your belly to back suplexes, or all of this sort of stuff? So you've got head control, and then you've got hip control, and then I think that final one, that wrist control, you could kind of argue that wrist and ankle control kind of branch it into the bracket of like limb or extremity control. Yeah. And I think, like, more importantly, one of those has to happen with probably one of the other 2 as well. You probably either got to have hip and arm, or head and arm, or hip and leg. I think they kind of pair in together nicely, but it's like head, hip, and limb. And if you've got control of one of those on your opponent, great. If you've got control of 2 of them, you've got a lot more options. When I look at what is my favorite option to go for, it's the safest option. I don't want to be doing any of these like sacrifice throws where you're giving your back up. Like, there's a high risk that you can give yourself in a bad position. If you drop into your knees and tuck it in underneath to get like a really nice looking judo throw, like you quite rightly said before there, you're at risk of giving you, it doesn't go perfectly. And if you're just going onto Instagram or YouTube and looking at some really nice technique that a judoka who's been playing for 20 years is demonstrating, go and try and do that on somebody. It's not going to work. You're going to end up getting your back taken and you're going to get choked out. So I like to go for the safe ones. I think like a safe one for me is like a collar tie position with either a wrist or a bicep. I really like that because I use it a lot for a snap down. And I think a snap down gives you a lot of different options to go for depending on what your opponent's reaction is. Let's say, for example, you hit the snap down and they bounce straight back up immediately. You can blast in on a blastable. Snap down, you get them to go heavy on one of the legs. You can take an ankle pick and either straight sweep to side control, or you can bring that up and start doing your single leg attacks. You can snap down, you can go straight around to the back. And Mickey Rod's doing that great at the moment, isn't he? He's using that snap down to back take, and it's just a beautiful slick transition. And that is probably one of the ones that translates over most directly from sport, I would say, like a freestyle wrestling snap down go behinds, wrestlers like chin strap control position. There's loads there, isn't there? Like personally, that's my favourite go-to position. What about you? It's kind of the same, or would you like something different?
Yeah, like I'm one of them where sometimes I'll try and play with the wrist control, because I do like to go for me arm drags, and I found going heavy on the arms kind of has that knock-on fatiguing effect, as their lower back's going to start getting tired, their shoulders start getting tired, they get frustrated from fighting the grips, and you can tend to find some injuries from there. But yeah, I'm torn between the wrist control and the head and the collar bicep tie. So you've got the entry for the double leg from the collar bicep, well, double leg entry from anywhere really. But I'm like yourself, where I do love the snap down. Like I said, a bit more of a fan of the Hinger style snap down, where you kind of try and get them to face plant the mat. But
it's a pretty safe and aggressive option, isn't it?
It is. Like, this means that you don't have to try and do any secondary techniques.
Does that count as a knockout? Like, can you get a TKO in grappling? Or is that straight to a DQ?
It's not in a verbal tap out.
yeah, I guess so. Tap out and knockout, or
yeah, like I sway more towards that collar bicep or that wrist control. Hip control's nice, but I personally struggle to get there sometimes. So I prefer the collar bicep and go between the wrist control as well. But the position stuff, like once you've sort of mastered the positions, you kind of want to go on to the takedown aspects of things as well, don't you? Just like with submissions and the ground game, like you want to learn how to choke somebody out before you even start to even learn how to control someone's back. So what I'd personally advise, and I'm sure Bond's the same with it, is learn to control someone's posture and the movement and the circular footwork. Learn that aspect of their stand-up game before you try to learn the takedowns, because once you can control someone where they're going, the takedowns are going to come much, much easier. But yeah, like would you add to anything to that one?
No, absolutely. I agree completely the same. Like the same as before you starting to look to go for an arm bar from side control, like you've got to have good side control first.
Yeah.
If your side control is no good, your opponent's just going to stand up or escape or start implementing their game on you. So stand up. It's exactly the same. If you want to start going for these techniques, you need to have those controlling positions first. You need to be able to control the head, the hips, the limbs. And like you said at the beginning, you know, I think some people call it like cooking your opponent. I think you've got a slightly different terminology for it.
Boiling potatoes.
The potato, isn't it? Yeah, boiling the potatoes. So we're going to boil your opponent like a bit of a potato first.
Like you're going to make a
perfect example of a perfect example of what we're talking about is if you go back and check out the Gary Tonin match that we did earlier on in the week. He's got that positional control first, hasn't he? Before he decides what he's going to do with it, before he decides that he's going to go for that takedown. And there's just a lot of control there first before the takedown actually happens.
Oh, definitely. He's boiling the potatoes before he eats your martyrs, doesn't he? But like, I think you'll notice that as well in the Galval versus Pena match. He does the exact same thing where he goes very heavy with his clubbing, his snap downs, his takedown entries. It's all just to really fatigue Pena and get him on the back foot a little bit. But speaking of the matches and stuff, like when you're kind of rolling, have you got any sort of techniques or anything that you'd advise, say, the beginner to intermediate level to maybe focus on more before they start going onto the flashy takedowns? Or what's your 3 favorite sort of go-to techniques from the stand-up?
I think a couple of safe ones to go for is if we, I said before that I like the snap down. It's a good one to get off that collar and bicep or collar and wrist control, and it gives you a lot of options off the back of that. So you could probably consider the snap down to be a transitional movement between a control, i.e. the collar and bicep, and then getting your finishes like your ankle picks or your single legs. So that one for me is key. Number one, it's a very safe technique. Arm drag's probably the next best one in my mind, because again that opens up a lot of options. You can get straight to the back on an arm drag and hit hip control, probably round the back. You can tie up your arms and get like a side controlled hip control position, and equally you can do an arm drag to a leg control. I think another one that I didn't necessarily mention before was using that snap down to get into like a guillotine style position, so like a wrestler's chin control style position as well. And again, kind of like the Josh Hinger face plant style snap down, it opens up a lot of different options in that way. But I think like basic ones that probably everybody's going to learn or already knows that you can start to incorporate into your game is using one of the things that we've talked about to set up a double leg takedown, to set up a single leg takedown, and to set up like a hip controlled trip.
Yeah,
I guess probably most people probably have already learned those positions. If you're listening to this podcast and you're still listening to this podcast at this point, you've probably done a bit of jiu-jitsu. If you've not, go and get on the mats at your club when the clubs open back up. But yeah, like double leg, single leg, and hip control. Those are the things that you should be looking for, I would say. What about you?
For me, like it's probably my top three go-to. Similar to you with the snap down. Like I love getting that snap down to the chin and the bicep control, and either turning the corner to try and turn them over, or if they're fighting to get back up, going for that blast double. From there, I'd also probably say after that, my favourite thing is a single leg, just because I don't really have the knees anymore to drop in for a double leg. But the single legs, I really like the entry for them, and you've got a lot of options to go for depending on how your opponent defends it. Running double, just going for your typical single leg. You can throw by and go behind. A lot of options to go for from there, even like your Thai style foot trips. And then after that, I'd probably say arm drag, where using that as either an actual takedown, arm drag, and just running around the back and using momentum, or using it as an entry to get to the back and set up some other kind of takedown, whether it's a valley drop, jumping on the back like Samoish did to Keenan in 2014, or probably there's other examples just fresh in my mind. But yeah, like they're sort of my probably three main ones. But like we said at the beginning, like this sort of subject's quite a large one, isn't it, for almost one video to cover it in. But it's something that we're most likely going to revisit with further in-depth discussions and try and take it to a more experienced level as well. But is there anything you want to add in there, Bon?
No, definitely. I think just finally to finish up, like same as anything else, pick a handful or a single technique that when we can get back on the mats that you're going to practice. And like anything else, drill it in practice on a compliant opponent so you can get your technique down. Then go and try it in live sparring. That's the time where you're going to figure out whether it's going to work, whether it's going to fit your game style, and start to see how these things start to chain together. Like the same as in MMA, the stand-up aspect is not separate from the ground aspect. You've got to look at how those transitions are working together. So, I mean, the other thing as well is like if you've not got a good transition between the two of them, you're kind of almost playing two separate sports in one, and they're never going to mesh up.
Yeah, I think that's something that we worth touching on before we wrap it up is learning that sort of tie in between the stand-up and the ground. Like, because I've seen it a lot where as soon as somebody gets a takedown, they kind of fall to the back, or they kind of almost let go of the partner, and then the scramble ensues and they get back to the feet. And it's like, get that transition between the takedown to the ground, where as soon as you hit the ground, you're still on your toes, you're driving your shoulder in, and you're controlling their hips and where their body goes. And another little addition to that is, just like on the ground, if something doesn't work, have a secondary attack. So a lot of good wrestlers and a lot of good submission players, they'll have a whole tree of moves that go off from each other. So they'll go from A, then A to B, then B to C, then maybe C to A, then go back A to D. There's a massive library of moves to go between. It's not just this double leg's not worked, I've got to do it again, or I'm not going to land a double leg. It's this double leg's not worked, but I can jump up and go around the back, go to the single leg. That's not working. I can go to a running double. Okay, they've hopped out of that. I can go back to the single leg. Okay, they're fighting out of that. I can go back to the back and go for a valley drop. It's getting those chains together, which is going to increase your percentage of success in getting a takedown.
Absolutely, could not agree more.
But,
if you disagree with anything that we've been going on about today, like, go get in the comments and let us know what your favourite submissions or series are. They're not going to be the same as ours. Everybody's game works differently, so we want to know what is working for you. Maybe it's something that we can incorporate into our game as well, or develop and talk on next time. So get in the comments and let us know what your 3 favourite takedowns and techniques are.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks again for listening. And if you've got any suggestions on future subjects, again, drop us a message on the Instagram pages, Facebook page, into our YouTube comments. And again, we'll do our best to accommodate as many questions as we can. Thank you.